I was 14 when I figured out I wasn't really a daughter in my parents' eyes. I was free labor. While other kids were going to the mall or hanging out at football games, I was climbing up on the roof with a hammer in my hand. My dad, Robert, barked orders like a drill sergeant who never enlisted. Grab the ladder, Marina, fix the gutter, the shingles are loose. He wasn't asking, he was commanding. My mom, Patricia, stood there watching like a foreman, nodding in approval every time I carried something heavier than I should have. She'd say things like, "You're tougher than most boys your age. Lauren could never handle this. She's too delicate." Lauren, my younger sister, was inside on the couch, probably painting her nails or talking about prom dresses. Delicate was their code word for spoiled. I learned quickly that my free time didn't belong to me. Weekends meant mowing acres of lawn, digging fence posts, scraping paint. I'd come home from school already tired, only to be met with a new project. My hands were constantly cut up. My back ached like I was twice my age. Dad thought it was funny. He'd ruffle my hair and say, "You're building character." What he really meant was, "You're saving me money." Lauren never heard those lines. She was chauffeured to after-school activities, piano lessons, and dances. I was the one holding a paintbrush at sunset while mosquitoes swarmed me. If I asked why Lauren didn't have to help, my mom smiled in that way only mothers who play favorites can. "She's the artistic one, you're the strong one." Translation, she gets to relax, you don't. The truth? I bought into it. When you're a teenager and your parents keep repeating the same script, you think it must be love. I convinced myself that being the reliable one made me special. But it didn't feel special when I was out in the yard with sweat dripping into my eyes, and Lauren skipped past me holding shopping bags. One memory still sticks like glue. It was a Saturday afternoon, pouring rain. Water was running down the shingles like a waterfall, and my dad decided it was the perfect time to fix the roof. I was halfway up the ladder, soaked, holding tools that kept slipping through my hands. Dad was on the ground yelling, "Don't waste time, Marina, get it done." I looked down at him, then looked over at my mom. She didn't say a word. Just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Meanwhile, Lauren was standing by the window inside, sipping hot chocolate. That snapshot never left me. I remember climbing down after nearly slipping and saying, "Why doesn't Lauren have to help?" Dad just smirked. "Because she's not you." That was the whole answer. And in their world, that was enough. It wasn't enough for me, though. I didn't realize it yet, but moments like that were the start of my breaking point. I wasn't learning responsibility, I wasn't building character. I was being used. And while Lauren got praise for every tiny achievement, I got told to fetch another bucket of nails. You know, sometimes I look back and laugh. If TikTok had existed then, I'd probably have gone viral as the teenager forced to roof a house. But back then, it wasn't funny. It was humiliating. Kids at school asked why I couldn't hang out on weekends, and I had to come up with excuses. I didn't want to admit I was patching holes in a fence while my parents treated my sister like a princess. By the time I hit 16, I could repair a roof, fix plumbing, mow more land than most landscaping crews, and still make it to my part-time job at a diner. I didn't get an allowance. I didn't get thanks. The one thing I got was a front row seat to favoritism. And the more they pushed me, the more I noticed how different their tone was with Lauren. When she forgot to clean her room? "She's busy with school." When I said I was too tired? "Stop complaining." If she brought home a B in class, Mom gushed like she was valedictorian. If I worked a double shift and got straight A's, Dad shrugged and asked if the gutters were clean. That's how my teenage years went: sweat, bruises, bills I didn't owe, and a constant reminder that no matter what I did, I was never going to be the favorite. And let me tell you, that kind of favoritism doesn't just sting, it brands you, you carry it. Every time I touched a hammer or scraped my hands raw, I knew exactly where I stood in that family hierarchy. Useful, but not valued. Strong, but disposable. You might be wondering why I put up with it. Simple. I thought that's what daughters were supposed to do. When you're conditioned long enough, you stop asking if it's fair. You just keep climbing the ladder in the rain. And that's where I stayed, year after year, building a house that I didn't realize I'd end up fighting for. If you've ever dealt with a family that played favorites, tell me in the comments. I read them all. And if you don't want to miss more revenge stories like this one, make sure you hit subscribe. The smell of birthday cake hit me as soon as I walked in the front door, but I wasn't invited to the party. I was there to park cars. My parents decided I should help out, while everyone else celebrated Lauren's 16th birthday. They had rented out the backyard with string lights and a rented DJ. Friends and neighbors showed up dressed like it was prom. I came straight from my shift at the diner, smelling like grease and coffee, and Dad shoved a stack of keys in my hand. "Park these over by the fence, Marina, you're good at that." When the big reveal came, I was standing off to the side, wiping dirt off my hands. My parents pulled the cover off a brand new car with a red bow on top. A chorus of gasps and claps erupted. Lauren squealed, ran over, and hugged them like they'd just bought her the moon. I watched as Mom shouted, "You earned this, sweetheart." Earned? She hadn't worked a single day in her life. She didn't even have a part-time job. Meanwhile, I was the one bussing tables, scrubbing floors, and still sending money home to help pay bills. The contrast was brutal. She got a car. I got another lecture from Dad about how I needed to build discipline. I stood there clapping half-heartedly while grease stains marked my shirt. No one looked at me. No one even thought to include me in the photos. I was invisible, except when something needed to be carried or fixed. That was the rhythm of my late teens. Every time I managed to scrape together money from my job, it seemed to vanish into the family budget. "We're short on the mortgage this month," Mom would say, sliding the bill across the counter. Or, "The power company's threatening to shut us off again." Meanwhile, Lauren strutted around with new clothes and salon appointments, bragging about the weekend trip Mom and Dad promised her. I told myself it was fine. I told myself families were supposed to stick together. But deep down, I was building a quiet resentment. I could feel it every time I looked at my pay stub and then at the envelope of cash I dropped on the kitchen table. My contribution wasn't helping me move forward, it was keeping everyone else comfortable while I stayed stuck. One night, after pulling a double shift, I came home and found Lauren sitting in the living room with her friends, showing off a shopping bag. "Look what Mom got me," she bragged, pulling out a dress with the tag still attached. She glanced at me, smirked, and added, "Oh, Marina, maybe someday you'll be able to afford something like this." Her friends laughed, not even realizing that the money for that dress came from the bills I'd paid so Lauren could have a shopping budget. I didn't say a word, I just went upstairs and closed my door. But I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body aching, my uniform still in a pile on the chair, wondering how much longer I could play this role. By senior year of high school, I was juggling school, a part-time job, and the endless projects Dad came up with. Lauren had weekends off to go to football games, dances, and road trips. I had weekends filled with ladders, buckets, and bills. One afternoon, Dad tossed me the car keys not to a new car, but to his beat-up truck. "Go pick up supplies from the hardware store. Fence needs a full repaint before winter." I remember driving there with my hands blistered, thinking, what about me? When is it my turn to be taken care of? Of course, that turn never came. Mom kept praising Lauren's achievements. Every test she passed was treated like a Nobel Prize. When Lauren got into a private college, my parents threw a dinner to celebrate. They toasted to her bright future, bragging to relatives about how they were covering her tuition. No one mentioned me, the one who quietly signed loan papers for community college classes while still working nights. The night of that dinner, I helped clear the dishes while everyone else talked about Lauren's plans. Mom smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, Marina, hard work builds character." I nearly dropped the plate in my hand. That line again. Always the same excuse for why I got nothing. The older I got, the more I understood the pattern. Every sacrifice I made wasn't temporary, it was permanent. They didn't see me as a daughter with her own future. They saw me as backup labor and an extra paycheck. And Lauren? She was their investment. Everything was funneled to her. It got to the point where I stopped asking for anything. Birthdays passed without gifts, holidays meant chores while Lauren unwrapped presents. When I turned 19, my parents didn't even bake me a cake. "You're too old for that," Dad said. But the very next year, Lauren's birthday involved a weekend trip to the beach. I remember standing outside in the cold one night, staring at the house lights glowing through the windows. Inside, Lauren was surrounded by friends, laughing, celebrating. I stood there holding an envelope with half my paycheck, ready to hand it over for the mortgage again. My stomach twisted. It was the first time I thought, maybe I don't belong in this house at all. That feeling stuck with me. It wasn't about the chores anymore. It wasn't about the bills, it was about knowing exactly where I stood. Useful, dependable, invisible. And every time Lauren smiled and my parents applauded her, I felt my place carved deeper into stone. I walked into the recruiting office with blisters on my hands and grease still under my nails. The sergeant behind the desk barely looked up before asking, "You lost, kid?" I wasn't lost. I was more certain in that moment than I'd ever been in my life. I told him I wanted ROTC, I wanted college, and I wanted a way out of the endless cycle of paying bills for a family that didn't even see me. The paperwork felt heavier than it should have, but signing it was the first time I felt like I was doing something for me. I didn't tell my parents until everything was official. When I finally sat them down, Dad laughed like I'd told a joke. "The army, you? You'll wash out in a week." Mom shook her head and said, "You don't need to play soldier, Marina. You should stay close, keep helping us. Family first." Of course, family first when it meant me sacrificing. Lauren smirked the whole time, sipping a soda like it was a comedy show. "Wow, Marina, you in uniform? Can't picture it. You'll be home in no time." That was the soundtrack of my so-called support system. Training started, and it was brutal. I'd thought roofing houses in the rain was tough, but Army boot camp laughed at that. The first week, I nearly collapsed on a 5-mile run. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burned, and for a split second, I considered quitting. Then I remembered Dad's words. "You'll wash out in a week," and something in me snapped. I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. I pushed harder. I learned to ignore the ache, to shove down the voice in my head that told me I was too tired. The drill sergeants didn't care about excuses, and for once, that worked in my favor. I wasn't anyone's invisible daughter there. I was just another recruit, judged by what I could do, not by how much money I could hand over. There were nights I lay in the bunk staring at the ceiling, every muscle screaming, but a strange calm settled in. For the first time, no one was calling my phone demanding I send cash. No one was yelling for me to grab a ladder or scrape paint. My only job was to survive and push forward. That kind of freedom doesn't sound like much, but to me, it was everything. I wrote letters home, though, old habit, I guess. Most went unanswered. The few times Mom did reply, her notes were short and sharp. "When are you sending money? Bills are late again." Not a word about training, not a single, "We're proud of you." Lauren sent nothing, not even a sarcastic postcard. I got through the program, and when they pinned that uniform on me, I held my head high. Dad's prediction had been wrong. I didn't wash out. I thrived. The Army became my family in a way my real one never had. My fellow soldiers didn't care about my last name or who my parents favored. They cared that I had their back, that I did my job, that I showed up ready. When I got my first real paycheck, I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. I should have kept it, should have spent it on myself. Instead, I sent half home. Old habits die hard. I told myself it was temporary, that I was still being a good daughter. But the pattern didn't change. Every time I had extra cash, Mom asked for it. Dad claimed business was slow again. Lauren? She was off at her private college, tuition fully paid, driving her shiny car, living a life cushioned by the money I sent. I was in the desert, moving supplies in 120-degree heat, while my parents treated me like their personal ATM. Still, I stayed. The Army gave me something bigger. Discipline, rank, and a sense of control I'd never had before. I climbed in position because I worked harder than anyone else. I became the soldier nobody could ignore, not the background character my parents had written me into. One memory kept me going. During field training, I fell face first in the mud during a ruck march. I thought I couldn't move another inch. My squad leader crouched down, shoved his hand under my arm, and growled, "You're not quitting, get up, you've got more in you." And I did. I stood, mud dripping, pack digging into my shoulders, and I kept moving. In that moment, I realized the army wasn't breaking me. It was rebuilding me. When I came home on leave wearing my uniform, Dad didn't have much to say. Mom gave me the same tight smile she always did. Lauren laughed under her breath. "Well, you made it longer than I thought." None of them asked about my training. None of them cared about the rank on my chest. They only asked about money. That night, while Lauren was showing off pictures from her college trip, Dad leaned over and asked, "So, how much are you sending this month?" It hit me like a punch in the stomach. I'd just proven myself in one of the toughest environments out there, but to them, I was still the girl with the wallet. And that's when I knew, if I ever wanted real freedom, I couldn't just survive the army. I had to survive my own family. The desert air burned my throat, and the dust stuck to every inch of skin. I was knee-deep in a supply operation, directing trucks under a blistering sun, when my phone buzzed inside my uniform pocket. I wasn't even supposed to have it out, but I snuck a look when the convoy slowed. It was Mom. The message was short and predictable. "We need help with the electric bill. Send something by Friday." I stood there, sweat dripping down my back, watching soldiers unload crates of medical supplies for a relief mission. People here needed us. They needed the logistics done right or entire towns would go without aid. But my own family, sitting in an air-conditioned house back in North Carolina, was treating me like their personal lifeline. That became the pattern. Every deployment, every exercise, every time I rotated through a base, my phone lit up with some crisis back home. Mortgage shortfalls. Utility threats. Car repairs. It didn't matter if I was coordinating fuel shipments in a storm or sleeping 4 hours a night on a cot. I was expected to pull out my bank app and transfer money. I sent it, most of the time. Guilt is powerful, and they knew it. I'd hear Mom's voice in my head. "Family helps family." It sounded noble, but it was really code for, "Marina, you sacrifice so the rest of us don't have to." One night, I was running logistics during a hurricane relief effort in Florida. Roads were flooded, people were stranded, and we were working round the clock. I barely had time to eat. My phone buzzed again. "Internet bill due. Need $140. I wanted to throw the phone across the tent. While I was coordinating rescue supplies for people who had lost everything, my parents were panicking over their Wi-Fi. I sent the money anyway. And that's what made it worse. I couldn't stop myself. Lauren, meanwhile, was thriving. At least, that's what Mom's occasional emails bragged about. She just got invited to another internship interview. "She's so bright. We're so proud." Not a single line about me moving equipment through floodwaters, or working 20-hour shifts, or getting commendations. The only time my name came up was attached to money. When I finally got leave, I went home in uniform. The pride I felt stepping off that bus evaporated the moment I walked into the house. There were no hugs, no banners, no welcome home. The first words out of Dad's mouth? "The roof's leaking again. Hope you've got time to fix it." I laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the kind you let out when you realize nothing's changed and maybe nothing ever will. So I fixed the roof, I patched walls. I replaced the filter in the HVAC. My parents praised my skills but never once said they were proud of my service. They praised Lauren for acing an exam I'm pretty sure she barely studied for. They bragged to relatives about her college, her car, her future. Me? I was the help. At night, lying in my old bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles. I had medals tucked in my bag downstairs, proof of everything I'd accomplished, but in that house, they didn't matter. What mattered was that the bills were paid, the chores were done, and Lauren got to stay cushioned. The breaking point came on a hot summer afternoon. I was outside, patching the fence line, when my phone buzzed again. Another bill. Another. We need your help. I wiped the sweat off my face with the back of my arm and looked at that message, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilt, I felt rage. I had been busting my back in the army, risking my life in storms, deserts, and chaos, and here they were still leeching off me like nothing had changed. Lauren came strolling out of the house with a smoothie in her hand, wearing a sundress she probably hadn't paid for. She gave me one look, laughed, and said, "You really like working, don't you?" Something in me hardened that day. I kept sending money a little longer, but the switch had flipped. I stopped seeing myself as helping my family and started seeing the truth. I was bankrolling them while they saved everything for Lauren's future. When I went back to base, I carried more than my duffel bag. I carried the realization that I wasn't just a soldier overseas, I was the soldier they used to keep the lights on while they pretended I didn't exist. And every time I stood in formation, every time I saluted an officer, every time I checked another supply manifest, that truth burned deeper. My sacrifice had never been about love or loyalty. It was about control. And that control had an expiration date. I came home on leave one spring, expecting at least a few quiet nights in my own bed. Instead, I walked into a house that suddenly felt too polished. Fresh paint on the walls, new rugs, furniture I didn't recognize. It didn't add up. Mom and Dad were always crying poor, always, one step away from losing the house, yet here they were redecorating like HGTV had stopped by. I didn't say anything, I just carried my bag upstairs and unpacked, but the uneasy feeling stayed. It wasn't just the new furniture, it was the way conversations stopped when I entered the room. I'd walk into the kitchen, and Mom would shove papers into a drawer. Dad would change the subject. Lauren would glance at me, then at them, and everyone would go quiet. One night, after a 12-hour drive back from base, I came home later than usual. The lights in the kitchen were on, and I heard voices. I stopped in the hallway, out of sight, and listened. Mom's voice was low but sharp. "The deed is in our names only. Marina's been paying for years, but none of that matters legally. She never asked for documentation." Dad chuckled. Not the warm kind of laugh, but the smug one he used when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. Classic Marina, all heart, no business sense, she thinks her contributions mean something. When we sell, she won't get a dime. I pressed my back against the wall, pulse hammering. Sell? Were they planning to sell the house? The house I'd patched, painted, and literally bled over? Then I heard Lauren's voice, casual as anything, "Won't she expect something? She's been helping for years." Mom scoffed. "Expect what? She never asked to be on the deed. Everything she gave us was voluntary. She's too naive to realize it." My chest went cold. Voluntary? They had begged me, over and over. They'd sent messages about overdue bills, threatened disconnection notices, mortgage deadlines. I had the receipts, the texts, the proof. But in that kitchen, they weren't talking about struggles anymore. They were talking about cutting me out, about treating every dollar and every hour of sweat like a free gift. Dad's voice dropped lower. "Once we sell, Lauren gets her start, she deserves it. Marina will be fine, she's in the army, she'll figure it out." Lauren didn't argue. She didn't say a word in my defense. She just let it hang there, like she agreed. I stood frozen, fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Every memory of me on that roof, in the rain, hauling wood, wiring payments from deployment, it all flashed through my head. And in one instant, it all clicked. They hadn't been struggling. They hadn't needed my help. They'd been using me, saving their money while draining mine. Also, Lauren could glide into adulthood with everything handed to her. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell or demand answers. Instead, I went upstairs quietly and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. If they wanted to play legal games, I'd meet them on that field. I started digging into property law. Hours turned into days. I wasn't an expert, but I knew how to research, how to cross-check, how to organize. Military logistics had trained me well for this. I learned that financial contributions, labor, and documented transfers could create an equitable interest in property even if my name wasn't on the deed. So I pulled out every bank statement, every transfer receipt, every text where they'd asked for help. I organized them by year, by category, mortgage support, utilities, home repairs. I tallied it all up. The number stunned me: over $80,000 in contributions, not counting labor. $80,000 I could have used to buy my own place, start my own life, but instead had sunk into a house my parents now plotted to sell out from under me. When I went downstairs the next morning, they acted normal. Mom asked if I wanted coffee. Dad read the paper. Lauren was scrolling on her phone. None of them knew I'd been standing in that hallway the night before. None of them knew I now had a different mission. I played along, I smiled, I even offered to run errands, pretending nothing had changed. But inside, the switch had flipped. The guilt that used to drive me to send money was gone. In its place was cold focus. I spent the rest of my leave gathering more evidence. Old receipts from Home Depot, invoices from contractors I'd covered, texts where Mom promised, "We'll make it up to you when things get better." Proof, piece by piece, until the file on my laptop was thick enough to choke the very lie they'd been living. Every time Dad asked me to fix something, I did it without complaint. Every time Mom asked for cash, I smiled and handed it over. They thought they were winning. They thought I was still the naive daughter they could manipulate. But in my head, all I could hear was that line from the night before: "She never asked for documentation." They were right about one thing. I hadn't asked before. But now? I wasn't asking. I was preparing. The quiet click of my bedroom door at night became my favorite sound. It meant I was alone, no eyes watching, no fake smiles, just me and my laptop glowing in the dark. While my parents slept down the hall, dreaming about selling the house and handing Lauren the proceeds, I was building a case brick by brick. I opened old bank statements and highlighted every transfer I'd made to cover the mortgage. The amounts weren't small, either $600 here, $1,200 there. Over time, it added up to tens of thousands. I scanned in receipts for lumber, paint, roofing shingles, even a water heater I'd purchased outright when the old one failed. Each one told the same story: I hadn't just lived in that house. I had funded it. My military training made the process almost too easy. Logistics had drilled into me how to track every item, every cent, every movement of resources. Now I was applying the same skills to my own life, and it was ruthless. I built spreadsheets with categories: mortgage contributions, home repairs, utilities paid. The totals climbed past $80,000 before I stopped counting. I sat back in my chair, staring at the number. No wonder I'd felt broke all the time. Sometimes I'd pause, lean back, and let the anger wash over me. All those weekends on ladders, all those transfers from deployment, all the nights I skipped dinner so I could make an extra payment, they had all convinced me it was temporary help. Meanwhile, they'd been saving their own money for Lauren. My sacrifices weren't invisible, they were calculated. But I didn't let the rage control me. I funneled it into preparation. I contacted an old friend from the JAG Corps, not for official advice, but for direction. He pointed me toward civilian attorneys who specialized in property disputes. I scheduled consultations quietly, one at a time, on days I knew my parents wouldn't notice I was gone. The first attorney I met, a sharp-eyed woman named Kelly Rhodes, flipped through my binder of documents. She paused at the stack of text messages where my parents had written things like, "We'll pay you back when things improve," and "This is just temporary, Marina." She looked up at me and said, "This isn't charity, this is reliance. You've got a strong case for equitable ownership." Her words hit me like adrenaline. Strong case. Ownership. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter they'd painted me as. I was the victim of exploitation, and the law could finally balance the scale. I walked out of her office with a new kind of calm. For once, I had leverage. At home, I kept my mask on. Dad complained about the gutters. I fixed them. Mom hinted about overdue bills. I nodded and helped. Lauren strutted in and out with shopping bags. I didn't flinch. If anything, I played the role harder. The more obedient I seemed, the less they suspected what was coming. Late one night, I found myself staring at a text from Mom asking for $300 to cover groceries. I laughed out loud in the dark. Groceries. Meanwhile, I'd seen their pantry overflowing. I sent the money anyway, but I saved the text. Another piece of proof. The more I gathered, the more I realized how sloppy they had been. They never hid their requests, never thought to cover their tracks. Why would they? They assumed I would never challenge them. That arrogance became my weapon. By the end of the summer, I had 3 binders full. Bank transfers, receipts, invoices, texts, emails, every line item, every favor, every so-called temporary loan. I had it all. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was sitting across from them at dinner, listening to them talk about the future. Dad boasted about how the housing market was hot. Mom chimed in about how timing is everything. Lauren asked casually, "When do we list it?" I chewed my food slowly, pretending not to notice the way none of them looked at me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. Inside, though, I was sharper than I'd ever been. Every laugh they shared about their secret plan only tightened my resolve. They thought I was naive. They thought I was too loyal to fight back. They thought wrong. One night, when everyone was asleep, I sat by the window in my old room, watching the porch light flicker. I thought about every moment that led here, the rain, soaked roofs, the missed birthdays, the endless bills. For years, I had believed being the strong one made me valuable. But now I saw the truth. Strength wasn't about carrying their weight forever. Strength was knowing when to drop it and when to strike back. So I closed my laptop, slid the binders into my duffel bag, and whispered to myself, "Let's see how brave they are when this goes to court." The text came on a Tuesday night while I was still in uniform, dust from a long day clinging to my sleeves. My phone buzzed, and there it was, words I'll never forget. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now, haha." I read it 3 times, my thumb hovering above the screen. My jaw tightened, but I didn't reply. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. I just sat down on the edge of my bunk and let out a laugh, sharp, humorless, but real. They thought they'd won. They thought they had finally stripped me of everything. What they didn't realize was that message wasn't a victory. It was evidence. That little haha at the end told me everything. This wasn't about finances. It wasn't about practicality. It was cruelty, plain and simple. They wanted me humiliated, adrift, dependent on them again. Instead, they had just handed me the last puzzle piece I needed. The next morning, I forwarded the text to my attorney. My message was short: file the petition. His response came fast. On it. While the paperwork was moving through the system, my parents had no idea. They probably thought I was somewhere crying or scrambling for a couch to crash on. They underestimated me the same way they always had, assuming I'd stay quiet, stay loyal, stay small. At work, I kept my head down and did my job. Convoys had to be scheduled, shipments signed off, trucks fueled. No one around me knew I was balancing logistics reports with legal strategy. The Army had trained me well: compartmentalize, execute, adapt. That skill set, honed in deserts and disaster zones, was now aimed squarely at the people who raised me. In the evenings, when the barracks quieted down, I'd open my laptop and review documents with my attorney over video calls. He walked me through the next steps: a demand for equitable ownership, backed by every receipt and transfer I'd collected. When he said, "You've got them cornered," I felt a satisfaction so sharp it almost hurt. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down on their performance. Mom left me voicemails, dripping with false concern. "We just had to do what's best for the family, Marina, you understand, don't you?" Dad sent emails full of tough guy bravado. "You're on your own now. Time to grow up." Lauren? She stayed silent. Not a single message. Not even a fake apology. If they thought silence or intimidation would scare me, they didn't know who I'd become. I wasn't the teenager hauling wood in the rain anymore. I was a soldier, a logistics officer, someone who had faced down chaos far bigger than a petty family power play. The cruel part is that they still believed they were in control. They probably pictured me pacing in some empty apartment, worried about how I'd survive. In reality, I was working side by side with professionals who knew exactly how to dismantle the little empire they thought they had built. When my attorney filed the petition, it wasn't just paperwork. It was the first shot fired. The locks they had changed so gleefully? Those would become the very symbol of their malicious intent. The house they thought was theirs alone? Legally, it was already half mine. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I knew better. This wasn't about quick wins, it was about patience, precision, and timing, 3 things the military had drilled into me until they were second nature. Still, that night, as I sat at my desk, I allowed myself one small smile. I thought back to the moment I read the message. My parents believed they had written me out of their story with one text. What they didn't realize was that they had just written their own downfall. And I was ready to sign my name at the bottom. The morning after I told my attorney to file, I woke up sharper than I had in months. The text from my mom was still sitting on my phone like a trophy, and I knew it was time to turn all my prep into action. Years of being treated like the family workhorse were finally going to pay off, not because they'd recognize my worth, but because the law would. I drove across town to meet Kelly Rhodes again, the property lawyer who'd reviewed my binders. She didn't waste time with small talk. She spread the papers across her desk like a general laying out battle plans. With what you've documented, you're not just asking for sympathy, she said. You're demanding legal recognition. And frankly, it's airtight. Hearing her confidence made something click inside me. In the army, confidence comes from preparation. You don't send soldiers into the field unless you know the plan holds. That was exactly what this was, a mission. My contribution logs were my intel, her strategy was the operation order, and the courtroom would be the battlefield. Kelly leaned forward, tapping the highlighted text messages from my parents. These are gold. Promises to pay you back, calling it temporary help, then threatening to throw you out. Judges love paper trails. Your parents just handed you the narrative of malicious intent. I nodded, flipping through the binder with her. It didn't feel like sitting in a law office, it felt like briefing before deployment. Except this time, the enemy wasn't across an ocean. It was the 2 people who raised me. When we finished, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You have a right to half that house. Maybe more if they push it. Are you ready for a fight?" I didn't hesitate. I've been ready my whole life. Leaving her office, I felt lighter, almost amused. For years, I thought discipline meant keeping my head down, paying the bills, fixing the house, staying loyal. But discipline wasn't just about endurance, it was about knowing when to strike back. Back at base, I kept working as usual, no cracks in my routine. Convoys, supply manifests, inspections, all squared away. If any of my soldiers had asked what was on my mind, they'd never guess it was a property case. But that's the thing about military training, you learn to fight a war on one front while keeping every other system running. My parents, on the other hand, started to sweat. Calls came in, not friendly ones. First, my dad left a voicemail, his voice cracking with forced authority. "This is ridiculous, Marina. Drop this now before you embarrass yourself." Then Mom called crying, saying, "We're family. We don't take each other to court." Lauren finally chimed in with a text, "You don't want to ruin everything for all of us, do you?" I didn't answer any of them. Silence was my new weapon. A week later, Kelly called me. Their lawyer reached out. They're rattled. First thing he said was, "We have a serious problem." She chuckled. "That problem is you." Hearing that, I laughed for real. For once, I wasn't the desperate one, scrambling to cover their mistakes. They were the ones panicking, watching their plan unravel. I thought about all the times my mom had said, "Family helps family," right before asking for money. About all the times my dad had said, "Hard work builds character," while sending me up a ladder in a storm. About Lauren standing by, always benefiting but never lifting a finger. And now, here they were, facing consequences they never imagined because I finally said no. That night, I sat in the barracks with my laptop open, rereading the draft petition. Every line was a reminder. Mortgage contributions, utility payments, repairs, labor. My name wasn't on the deed, but my fingerprints were all over that house. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, and let myself enjoy the picture. My parents thought they had locked me out for good. What they didn't realize was that the locks weren't the end, they were the beginning. And now, with military precision and legal firepower, I was walking straight through the door they tried to slam shut. The first sign that my parents had received the legal notice came with an uncharacteristically polite phone call from my mother. "Marina, honey, can we talk?" Her tone was sweet enough to give me a toothache. I almost laughed, because the same woman who sent me a text saying I had no home was suddenly calling me honey. I didn't answer. The voicemail played out with her voice cracking, saying, "We didn't mean it that way, we were angry, you don't want lawyers involved. Let's keep this private." Private, of course, meant hidden. She didn't want a judge seeing the years of transfers and receipts I had stacked against them. Then my father called, and he wasn't sweet. He was furious. "You think you can take us down? After everything we've done for you? Don't forget who gave you a roof over your head." His voice shook with anger, but behind it, I could hear the panic. He wasn't angry because he thought I was wrong, he was angry because he knew I was right. I let the call go to voicemail too. The next day, Lauren finally broke her silence with a string of texts. "You're overreacting. Mom and Dad are just trying to plan for retirement. You have your army stuff, you don't need the house. Don't be selfish." That one made me laugh out loud. Selfish? After covering bills, mortgage, and repairs, while she got a brand new car and private college tuition? If selfish meant finally drawing a line, then fine, I was selfish. Their panic escalated quickly. Another voicemail came from Dad, this time quieter, his voice almost pleading, "We don't need to go to court, we can work this out as a family, don't embarrass us." There it was again, that obsession with appearances. They didn't care about fairness, only about how it would look when the truth came out. What they didn't realize was that I had already stopped caring about appearances. I'd spent too many years being the invisible daughter, the workhorse behind the curtain. This wasn't about making them look bad. This was about finally making myself visible. I forwarded the voicemails and texts to my attorney, who simply replied, "They're scrambling. Don't engage. Let them sweat." That advice was easy to follow. Every message they left only added fuel to the fire. A few days later, I got a formal letter from their attorney. It was full of pompous language about ungrateful children and family disputes that should remain private. Kelly, my lawyer, barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. "This is noise," she said. "They're trying to scare you into backing down, but they have nothing to counter the evidence." Meanwhile, back at base, I kept my composure. My soldiers didn't need to know I was in the middle of a war zone at home. They needed me steady, focused, unshaken. And honestly, the Army had given me the perfect training for this. I'd learned how to face chaos without flinching, how to stick to a plan when pressure mounted, and how to recognize when the enemy was bluffing. My parents were bluffing. The angrier my father got, the calmer I became. When he screamed in another voicemail, "You'll regret this, Marina, families don't betray each other like this," I couldn't help but shake my head. Families don't betray each other? That line would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Families don't lock their daughter out of the house with a text. Families don't siphon $80,000 of her hard-earned money while showering another child with gifts. Kelly told me we were close to mediation, and I could almost hear the stress in my parents' voices even through silence. They had gone from cocky to desperate in a matter of weeks. Their so-called plan for a comfortable retirement was crumbling before their eyes, and they knew it. I thought back to every time I'd wired them money from deployment zones. Every time I'd worked double shifts and still sent cash for their emergencies. Every time I'd patched their roof or fixed their plumbing while Lauren paraded around with another shopping bag. All those sacrifices had built the foundation of that house, and now, for the first time, they were terrified that foundation was strong enough to push back. One evening, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Lauren. "Just think about what you're doing, Marina. You're tearing the family apart." I stared at the screen and shook my head. The family had been torn apart a long time ago. I wasn't the one who did it, I was just the one finally refusing to cover it up. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message, closed my phone, and went back to reviewing supply reports. My life had order, structure, and meaning now. Theirs was unraveling. And as much as they tried to scare me back into silence, the truth was simple: the louder they shouted, the more obvious it became that they were already losing. The mediation was scheduled for a Monday morning in a downtown office building, the kind with sterile beige walls and humming fluorescent lights. I walked in wearing my uniform, not because I had to, but because I wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't the teenager scraping paint off siding anymore, I was an army officer who knew how to keep calm under pressure. Kelly, my attorney, sat up on one side of the long conference table, papers neatly stacked, binders aligned. I sat beside her, my back straight, hands folded, silent. Across from us, my parents entered first, with Lauren trailing behind. Dad's face was red before he even sat down, his jaw clenched like he was ready for a fight. Mom tried to keep her usual air of superiority, but her eyes darted nervously to the thick binder Kelly had already placed in the center of the table. Lauren just looked pale, as if she'd rather be anywhere else. Their lawyer followed them in, shuffling papers, pretending he wasn't about to get steamrolled. He started with a hollow statement about family matters best resolved privately and misunderstandings that shouldn't destroy relationships. I kept my eyes on the binder and said nothing. Kelly slid it across the table. "This is the record of my client's financial contributions over the past 14 years, she said evenly. Mortgage payments, utility bills, home repairs, contractor invoices. Totaling more than $85,000, each entry documented and supported." Dad scoffed, flipping a page with the confidence of a man who still thought bluster could win, but the longer he looked, the faster that confidence drained from his face. The color shifted from red to gray as he scanned line after line, each one a receipt with my name attached. Mom leaned forward, trying to interrupt. These were gifts, she was helping her family, like any daughter should. That. Kelly didn't blink. No, Mrs. Caldwell. These were not gifts. They were solicited contributions, made under repeated promises that repayment or acknowledgement would come once your financial situation improved. Promises you never intended to keep. She flipped to a section of highlighted text messages. Dad froze when he saw his own words: "We'll pay you back when business picks up." Mom's infamous lock, change message was printed in bold on the next page, complete with the ha-ha at the end. The room went silent. For once, my parents didn't have a script ready. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, staring at the papers. Her voice was small. "I didn't know it was this much." I turned to her for the first time and said quietly, "You were at the table when they planned to cut me out, you knew enough." Dad slammed a hand down. "This is ridiculous. After everything we've given you, food, a home, clothes, you repay us with this? Dragging us into a legal circus?" I looked him straight in the eye. "After everything I gave you, money, labor, years of my life, you repay me by changing the locks and laughing about it." Mom's composure cracked then, her voice rose, trembling with anger. "You're tearing this family apart, Marina." Kelly interjected, calm as ever. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, your daughter isn't tearing anything apart. She's asking for recognition of her equitable ownership. This mediation is your chance to settle before the court makes that decision for you." Their lawyer cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Perhaps we can discuss percentages." Kelly cut him off smoothly. 50%, nothing less." The temperature in the room dropped. My parents stared at me like I just betrayed them on a battlefield. But I didn't flinch. My hands stayed steady on the table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them, I was watching them react to me. Lauren finally spoke again, her voice brittle. "If she takes half, what's left for us?" I turned to her once more, not raising my voice, just stating fact. "What's left is the half you didn't earn with my money." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dad muttered something about ungrateful children and leaned back in his chair, defeated. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but even she seemed to know the performance wasn't working. Kelly closed the binder with deliberate care. You have a choice. Acknowledge her rightful share now, or face a court order later. Either way, she wins. And for the first time, I believed it completely. The battle I'd been fighting silently for years was no longer mine alone. The evidence spoke louder than their denial ever could. The mediator tried to calm the room, but it was pointless. My parents' denial was unraveling page by page, and Kelly wasn't about to let them wriggle out. She slid another stack of documents forward, bank statements, highlighted in yellow, showing their savings and investments during the exact same years they'd begged me for emergency help. These accounts, she said firmly, tapping her finger on the balance line, prove the Caldwells were not in financial distress. They had more than enough liquidity. Yet they repeatedly solicited funds from my client, under the guise of temporary need. Dad's face flushed so dark I thought he might actually explode. That money was ours to manage. She lived under our roof, she owed us. Kelly didn't blink. She didn't owe you $85,000. And she certainly didn't owe you years of unpaid labor. She opened another folder, this one filled with photos. Me, as a teenager, perched on the roof with a hammer. Me pushing a lawnmower across 3 acres of property. Receipts for Home Depot purchases signed with my debit card. Even a contractor invoice with my name on it, covering a plumbing repair they'd told relatives, was so expensive. Mom finally broke, her voice shook, sharp but thin. We didn't force her, she offered, she wanted to help. I spoke up for the first time in an hour. My voice was calm, almost casual. Wanting to help is one thing. Being manipulated into draining my paycheck while you padded your savings is another. Huh. Lauren shifted in her chair, chewing her lip, trying not to make eye contact with me. For once, she didn't look smug. She looked trapped. Kelly turned the knife. She picked up the printed copy of Mom's lock change text, reading it aloud so the whole room couldn't ignore it. We changed all the locks, you don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now, ha ha. The words hung in the air like smoke, even their lawyer looked uncomfortable. This message, Kelly said, holding it between 2 fingers, is not only cruel, it demonstrates malicious intent. Your clients deliberately excluded their daughter from a property she financially supported, mocking her as they did it. That intent is clear. That pattern is clear. And the law is clear. She has an equitable claim. The mediator cleared his throat and leaned forward. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, it's my duty to be neutral, but I will say this plainly, this evidence is compelling. A court is unlikely to see this as anything but deliberate exploitation. Dad barked out a bitter laugh, leaning back in his chair. So she wants half the house? After everything we did for her growing up? After feeding her, clothing her? I looked him dead in the eye. After using me as your unpaid handyman? After taking $85,000 you never needed? After laughing while you locked me out of the house I paid for? Yes. Half. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt in combat zones. Mom wiped her face with a tissue, her hand trembling. Lauren finally whispered, I didn't know it was this bad. I turned to her, my voice steady. You knew enough. You were at that kitchen table when they planned to cut me out, you just didn't care. She flinched, but said nothing. Their lawyer tried one last angle. Surely there's a middle ground, perhaps a smaller percentage. Kelly shut it down instantly. 50%. My client isn't negotiating away her rights, the documents make her a co-owner, whether you like it or not. Dad cursed under his breath, Mom muttered something about betrayal. But I didn't waver. For the first time in my life, I wasn't on the defensive. I wasn't explaining, or excusing, or carrying their weight, I was simply standing my ground. The mediator scribbled notes and looked at my parents' lawyer. Advise your clients. If this proceeds to court, they will almost certainly lose, settlement here would be wise. No one spoke after that. The binder sat in the center of the table like a bomb that had already gone off. My parents, who once thought they could control me with guilt, were cornered by their own paper trail. And I sat there quietly, letting them drown in the truth they had tried so hard to bury. 6 weeks after mediation collapsed, I walked into the courthouse with the same steady calm I carried into every deployment briefing. The building was old, with polished wood benches and flags on the walls, but the air felt sharp with tension. My parents sat across the aisle, stiff and furious, Lauren wedged between them like a buffer. Their lawyer shuffled papers, already sweating. Kelly stood beside me, radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing the evidence is ironclad. The judge was blunt from the start. He wasn't interested in theatrics. He wanted facts, and Kelly delivered them with military precision. Exhibit A. Mortgage transfers totaling $47,000. Exhibit B. $23,000 in repair and improvement costs. Exhibit C. $15,000 in utilities and maintenance. Add in photos, receipts, and the infamous text about the locks, and the narrative wrote itself. My father tried to interrupt, claiming I had lived rent-free for years. Kelly countered instantly. Your Honor, the average value of her unpaid labor, documented by these receipts and photographs, exceeds what reasonable rent would have been. And the family benefited from her contributions while stockpiling their own savings. The judge's expression never changed, but I caught the smallest flicker of disapproval when Kelly read Mom's lock change text aloud. That ha-ha landed exactly as intended, proof of cruelty, not desperation. When it was my parents' turn, their lawyer made a half-hearted argument about family duty and gifts given freely. Dad raised his voice, insisting, "We fed her, clothed her, gave her a roof over her head." I stood, cleared my throat, and asked permission to speak. The judge nodded. My voice didn't shake. I'm a soldier. I've served this country overseas, coordinated relief during natural disasters, and kept convoys running through combat zones. And yet, the only time my family called me was when they needed money. I paid their bills, fixed their house, and believed every promise that it was temporary. Then they changed the locks, mocked me, and planned to sell the home I'd funded without giving me a dime. That's not family, that's exploitation. The courtroom went so still I could hear Lauren's shaky breath. The judge leaned forward. I've heard enough, the evidence is overwhelming. This court recognizes an equitable interest in the property. Effective immediately, Marina Caldwell is declared a 50% owner of the residence. It was one sentence, but it might as well have been a cannon blast. Dad's jaw dropped. Mom gasped and buried her face in her hands. Lauren just stared at the floor, cheeks burning red. Kelly squeezed my arm lightly, whispering, "We did it." But it wasn't we. It was me. All the nights of sorting receipts, the hours of silence while they gloated, the months of discipline, it all crystallized in that ruling. Outside the courthouse, I stood with the stamped order in my hands. The sun was glaring, traffic buzzing in the distance, but the only thing I could focus on was the embossed seal at the bottom of the page. For once, justice wasn't abstract. It was physical, weighty, undeniable. My parents stormed past me on the steps, refusing to meet my eyes. Dad muttered something about appealing, but his voice lacked its usual thunder. Mom just clutched her purse like it could protect her. Lauren trailed after them, silent. I didn't chase them, I didn't need to. Reporters weren't there, friends weren't there, no one was clapping, but I didn't care. That wasn't the point. The point was standing in the sunlight with a court order that said I wasn't disposable. The law had given me the recognition my family never would. I tucked the papers into my bag and walked to my car. Every step felt lighter, not because the fight was over, but because I knew I'd never carry their weight again. When I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For years, I'd wondered if being the strong one meant staying silent and sacrificing. Now I finally understood, real strength meant standing up, even if it meant standing alone. And as I drove away from the courthouse, the building shrinking in the rear view, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever locks my parents changed, they couldn't lock me out of justice. The ruling hit my parents like a grenade, and the fallout spread fast. Within weeks, the house was listed for sale. I didn't gloat when I saw the sign hammered into the front yard, but I won't lie, it felt like balance was finally restored. That two-story home with its manicured hedges and shiny shutters had been their fortress of control. Now it was a liability they couldn't keep. Neighbors noticed. I heard through a cousin that Mom was spinning the story, telling anyone who would listen that Marina forced us out. Of course, she left out the part about locking me out first, or about siphoning my money for years. Dad avoided most people altogether. Pride had been his favorite armor, and the ruling stripped it away. The sale process was brutal on them. The realtors' open houses meant strangers tramped through every weekend, commenting on fixtures I had repaired, floors I had refinished, the roof I had patched during a rainstorm. Each compliment was salt in their wound. When the sale finally closed, the math was simple. After taxes and fees, I got a check for $320,000, half the proceeds. My parents walked away with the other half, but it wasn't enough for the retirement dream they'd been plotting. They downsized into a cramped condo on the edge of town. For two people who had always flaunted appearances, moving into a boxy two-bedroom complex with peeling paint was the sharpest humiliation of all. Lauren had it worse. With the house gone, she couldn't coast rent-free anymore. She called me once, voice small and hesitant. "So, you're really keeping the money?" I almost laughed. "Lauren, I earned that money a long time ago." She tried again, softer this time. "I don't know how to afford a place on my own." Her problem wasn't mine to solve. For years, she had stood by while our parents drained me. She had taken her gifts, her tuition, her new car, and never once asked if it was fair. Now she was learning the lesson late. "Welcome to adulthood," I told her. Then I hung up. Word traveled fast through the extended family. Some relatives called me brave, others whispered that I had destroyed the family. I didn't bother defending myself anymore. Let them believe what they wanted. The ones who mattered knew the truth, and the court's seal backed me up. The strangest part was how quiet my parents became. No more angry voicemails, no more guilt trips, just silence. It was as if they realized yelling couldn't change the reality written in legal ink. Meanwhile, I deposited the check and started looking for my own place. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't pouring money into someone else's pocket. I toured townhouses near my base in Raleigh, walking through kitchens where no one would ever tell me what I owed. When I finally closed on one, a modest but beautiful brick front unit, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The moving truck came on a Friday morning. I carried in boxes of my own furniture, hung my own pictures, and set up my own flag outside the door. A crisp American flag, fluttering in the wind. Not for decoration, not for show, just as a reminder of who I was and what I'd survived. I thought about the irony. My parents had tried to erase me from the house I helped pay for, but in the end, that decision gave me the means to buy a home that was mine, completely mine. Their downfall had become my foundation. And as I stood on the porch that first night, watching the flag ripple under the streetlight, I knew I didn't need their approval or their apologies. They'd already given me the best gift they never intended. Freedom. The first weekend in my new townhouse, I woke up without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on me. The morning light came through the blinds, and for once, there wasn't a single text demanding I fix a leaking pipe, cover a bill, or handle a crisis that wasn't mine. I brewed coffee in my own kitchen, leaned against the counter, and let the quiet sink in. I decorated the way I wanted, no passive-aggressive comments about my taste, no silent judgment from people waiting for me to fail. The living room wasn't big, but it was warm and full of things I'd chosen. My boots lined neatly by the door, a framed photo of my unit on the wall, the flag outside catching the breeze, reminders of a life I had built, not one stolen or handed down by anyone else. Sometimes the silence was startling. For years, my life had been filled with the noise of obligation commands, requests, arguments, guilt. Now it was just me. At first, I thought I might miss the chaos, even the fighting. But the truth was, I didn't. Freedom has a sound, and it's quieter than you expect. The calls from my parents came less and less. The voicemails turned from anger to pity to silence. My mother left one final message. "You'll regret this when we're gone." I deleted it without listening twice. My father tried emailing about what family owes each other, but I filtered his address straight to spam. Lauren texted me once from her new apartment, clearly struggling. She asked if we could rebuild things. I didn't respond. Rebuilding requires a foundation, and they had burned ours to the ground. At work, my fellow officers noticed the shift. I carried myself differently. Lighter, calmer, more focused. My commanding officer even pulled me aside. "Caldwell," he said, "whatever burden you've been carrying, it looks like you finally dropped it." He was right. For the first time, my discipline and strength weren't being drained at home just to keep the peace. I could put that energy back into the mission, into leading soldiers, into being the officer I was meant to be. Buying the townhouse wasn't just about property, it was about reclaiming power. Every payment I made was mine. Every repair, mine. Every choice, mine. That kind of independence doesn't come from luck or handouts, it comes from surviving betrayal, learning the rules, and refusing to stay quiet when someone tries to erase you. There are moments I still think about the night my mother texted me. "We changed the locks. You don't have a home anymore." It was meant to scare me, to break me. Instead, it became the evidence that freed me. I smile every time I lock the door to my place now, because the key is mine alone. I don't regret a single thing. Not the confrontation, not the court battle, not the fallout. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson in loyalty. What they really did was show me that loyalty without respect is just servitude, and I'm done being a servant. On the first Sunday in my townhouse, I planted a rose bush out front. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple white rose. But to me, it meant something. Growth. Renewal. Proof that out of years of being used, something strong and lasting could take root. Neighbors walked by, nodding politely, some asking if I'd just moved in. I smiled and said, "Yeah, it's mine." Saying those words felt better than any medal I'd ever been handed. This was a victory no one could pin on my uniform or take away with a phone call. I'm not naive. I know family might circle back someday, looking for forgiveness or favors. Maybe they'll want to rewrite the story, paint themselves as misunderstood, but I don't owe them that. What I owe is to myself, the woman who carried her weight and theirs, the officer who served her country with honor, and the daughter who finally stopped letting family duty be an excuse for exploitation. The truth is, revenge wasn't about taking half the house, it was about showing them they could no longer define my worth. And every morning when I walk out my front door, boots hitting the pavement, flag snapping in the wind, I'm reminded that independence isn't given, it's claimed. And I claimed mine. Looking back, I realized this wasn't just about a house or money. It was about years of family drama boiling over until the only choice left was to stand up for myself. In the end, this became one of those family revenge stories that prove sometimes the best revenge stories aren't loud or violent, they're about taking back your power in ways no one expects. If you connected with this story, don't forget to hit subscribe. This channel is built on real family revenge stories, stories of betrayal, justice, and resilience. By subscribing, you won't miss the next powerful family drama that reminds us all, no matter how deep the betrayal, there's always a way to fight back.